Good afternoon, good morning, good night, everyone. I am not sure what time of day you are viewing this video. However, I do hope that this video meets you in good health. My name is Sidney Sawyer, a social science teacher at RM Bailey Senior High School. And this video is in preparation for our BGCSE that we know we have to take and we're planning to take and secure the best possible grades that we possibly can. Okay. And so this is again for your history BGCSE theme 4 to be specific. What do we want to do today? Today, we are going to be reviewing the transatlantic slave trade. We're going to be explaining the ways Africans were sold in the New World, and we're going to be empathizing with Africans who were sold in the New World. So we know that historians typically we like to empathize. And empathy means that we're feeling with a person, we're putting ourselves in their shoes. All right. And that is how we're going to be able to get through. And this is how we really get to understand the plight of the Africans. We start to empathize with them. Okay, we've empathized during the Middle Passage. We've empathized for their capture in Africa. Now we want to empathize with their soul, with their sail, sorry. So let's do a bit of a review. I was traded on the first leg of the transatlantic slave trade. Who am I? You should have said manufactured goods, things like clothes, alcohol, glass, beads, money. Any of these things were carried from Europe to Africa, first leg of the transatlantic slave trade. I am the name given to the route from Africa to the New World. I am the Middle Passage. We know that this Middle Passage was such an arduous activity. Historians the world over have agreed that more people have died, more Africans have died on the Middle Passage than those who actually died on the plantation. Right? So you can imagine that this is a very terrible and tormenting experience. I was carried from Africa to the New World. Who am I? I am the Africans or the enslaved people. Because we don't say slaves anymore, we say enslaved people. Okay? I was traded on the third leg of the transatlantic slave trade. Who am I? I am the raw material. Raw materials such as cotton, sugar, tobacco, cocoa, any of these things would have been those which would have been transported, or they would have been extracted by the enslaved people on the plantations in the New World and then transported to Europe to be manufactured. And the cycle continued and continued. So their arrival in the New World. So the enslaved people would have lived through, those who would have lived through the Middle Passage would eventually arrive in the New World and would have to be sold. But before they can be sold, they have to be prepared for sale. Once the ship arrived in the New World, it was then washed down and the enslaved people were prepared for sale. So, I mean, again, we're achieving that empathy goal. You normally prepare a car to be sold. You prepare a house to be sold. You prepare a plate of food to be sold. So imagine as a person, a human being, having to be prepared for sale. Wow. To make them look pleasing, they were stripped and shaved to remove gray hairs and that lowered their selling price. Now, why do you think they removed the gray hairs? You should have said, like, I hope I don't sound too much like Dora or Diego. You should have said that they removed the gray hairs because the gray hairs make you look old. All right, and the Europeans or the people who own the plantations in the New World would not want any old slaves because they felt that the old slaves would not be able to work as hard or get as much work, which would essentially be meaning that they're not making as much money from what they invested in. Palm oil was rubbed into their muscles to give a healthy and firm appearance, much like how a lot of us rub, well, I mean, a lot of us rub oils on our skins to make ourselves look shiny and clean. Um, some captains tried to cover up the wounds and scars by rubbing cosmetic mixtures such as gunpowder, lime juice, and even rust, iron rust. How did they get these wounds? You should have said that they got them on the Middle Passage. Remember, a lot of them were whipped and beaten. Then they just looked like they went through hell. Okay, they were not fed, kept below the decks, only let up for air every now and again. It reeked. They were. It was just a bad experience. and they were given new names which represented their new identity. So this is that preparation for their sale. Let's watch this video.
People in the Americas knew when a ship arrived because they could smell it. If the wind was blowing from offshore, people would know that for sure. Maybe a day before it came. It would be sort of like a septic tank coming towards you. That's what it would smell like.
The sale itself would happen either on board the ship or a warehouse nearby.
Let the scramble commence!
Slaves would be inspected by prospective buyers who would poke and prod and open their mouths and all these things to try to assess the physical capacity of the slave. Once you get into the era of print, there were always advertisements in the newspapers.
The colonial newspaper is a small thing. It's 4 pages maybe. And on that last page, property is being advertised: land, horses, wagons, and human beings.
And they would use adjectives to sort of entice buyers. Lusty slaves, a fresh cargo of prime Africans from such and such a region.
So how much wealth does one person represent? For men, price rose with age up until around 25 or 30, and then it started to decline.
Once we get to the 19th century, the cost of an enslaved person would approximate the cost of an automobile in today's dollars. To own 50 or 100 enslaved people is to be a very wealthy person indeed.
For women, it's a little bit different. Price is correlated with perceived years of remaining fertility, or is linked to perceived sexual attractiveness. One of the attractions of slavery for enslavers, particularly men, is the sexual access that they believe it gives them. The role of violent, forced sexuality in the trade. We know that it was quite extensive. I think we have to come to grips with the fact that that was really in the minds of enslavers and other whites, and was really in the practices of slavery.
It's time you're.
So listening to that video, you would have heard, sorry, I'm sweating. You would have seen the inhumane activity of slave sale and preparation. They walk into, well, first he says you would know the ship is coming because you would smell it. So you know that has to be an extreme scent, right? And we know that the scent is horrendous on the boat because they were kept below the decks and not allowed to use the bathroom, and the scent reeked. Okay, the boat reeked. They walk into the building and say, "Let the scramble begin," as if it's a dog race or something, or wrestling match. She says that it would be advertised in the same categories as land or horses. So we understand that slavery was inhumane, and the sale of slaves was inhumane as well. So there are two ways that slaves were sold. The first of which is a scramble. And this is where Africans were separated into groups for which set prices were fixed. The signal was then given. Planters rushed on board to choose which group the enslaved they wanted. Obviously, they wanted the ones with the best quality for the least money. And this was an extremely cruel process. I want you to imagine that there's this one set, obviously the prime one. More than one person is going to want it. So think of it like this. It's a Black Friday sale at Walmart, and there's this very nice long sleeve sweater that two people want. One person yucks it from one sleeve, and the other yucks it from the next, and they begin to tug at it. Right, it's a tug of war activity at this point. because one person, well, the two of them want this long sleeve sweater. This is what it was like for the Africans. This is what it was like for the Africans. People would be yucking at them because they obviously wanted it. Can you imagine having to live through that? This is our empathy now. Can you imagine having to live through that? Some of us would want to fight and we hope that we could turn into the Hulk and just break out of their grips and do what we got to do. But this is what the Africans had to live through. The second way was a slave auction. An auction is very popular. Um, we've seen auctions happen very often on TV. This where they just say, okay, we're starting the bidding at $10. Do I hear $10? I hear $10. Do I hear 20? Do I hear 25? And it was sold to the highest bidder. This is essentially what they did for the Africans. But we do that for things, but they're doing it for humans. Inhumane process. They are again advertised by age, gender, and tribe skill and would be sold to the highest bidder. The place in the Bahamas where the enslaved people were sold was called Vendu House, and Vendu House is at present Pompey Museum, which is downtown in the area where Senior Frogs and in the back area there. All right. They were then branded once they were sold to their new owners. These are some examples of the advertisements used for the enslaved people. They would have mentioned some in the video. They call them lusty slaves or a fresh cargo of Negroes. We advertise things that when we're selling dogs, when we're selling we say this beautiful plate of food, we say this 6-bedroom house. We say these things to sell material goods. But here they are saying this about Africans, human beings. That's the thing that we want to remember. So we talked today about the transatlantic slave trade. We know we call it the transatlantic slave trade because they were going across the Atlantic Ocean. We've talked about the types of the sale of slaves, auction and scramble. Be able to explain those and know the difference between the two, and be able to empathize and say why this would add to the sale of slaves would add to why slavery was a cruel process. This is Mr. Sawyer signing out.